images that will stay with us for a lifetime. The suffering must end.
Is the tide turning on international support for Israel? We've got former Canadian ambassadors to Israel and the U.S. standing by. But first, U.S. President Donald Trump's trade deadline is just 3 days away. While in Washington last week, Canada's negotiating team downplayed the likelihood of a deal by Friday. Today, though, Trump's Commerce Secretary says that deadline will not be delayed any further.
We're going to have things done by Friday. And Friday is not that far away, so you should expect, we said, August 1st is the date that we're setting all these rates, and they are off to the races after that.
Trump wrote to Prime Minister Mark Carney earlier this month saying that on August 1st, the U.S. will slap a 35% tariff on goods that do not comply with the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement. So, where do those talks stand right now? I'm joined by Republican Senator Kevin Cramer from North Dakota now. He is the co-chair of the Canada-U.S. Interparliamentary Group. Senator, good to have you back on the program.
It's great to be with you, David. Thank you.
Senator, you have been very close to the president for many years. Are you on the same page as Donald Trump when it comes to tariffs against Canadian goods?
Well, at this point, I like where we all are, is assuming that we can get to a long-term resolution that's similar to what we have right now. The 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum are a little bit concerning to me, to say the least. But I think with the rest of it, we can get to a place that's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, I do want to talk about steel and aluminum, but before we get to that, if we just get overarching, do you have any information that suggests we actually are close to a deal, that Friday's deadline is viable?
Well, I think in all likelihood, David, that Friday's deadline may come and go. My hope is, and what I'm encouraging the president to do, is to not issue any new tariffs, any 35% or anything like that, but rather extend the deadline if a deal isn't made. I think it's hard to put all of the onus on the other countries when we're deal making with so many at the same time. And I think he has that sense of fair play as well. For example, with Canada, the carve out for USMCA makes all of the sense in the world. And then applying some of that to non-USMCA things that are in high demand in the United States that are unique to Canada, such as potash, which of course in North Dakota we relate very closely to, and some energy products as well. Energy products, as you know, flow in and out between the two countries as though we are one country. So, I think that framework that's been in place now for a long time, I think extending that while negotiations continue is very realistic. Now, that said, we've seen how fast deals can come together, and we know that a lot of good people on both sides are working together on it. Our Trade Representative Jameson Greer is working closely with your ambassador, Kirsten Hillman, and your Trade Minister, LeBlanc. So things are happening, so it's possible, but I'm more concerned about the urgency of the moment and making sure that we do no harm while negotiations continue.
If it is just a question of more time is needed, how do you communicate that to the president, to the White House? Don't do anything on Friday, as you've threatened.
Well, I'm not going to advise him not to. I give him my position and my opinion, of course. He'll make the ultimate decision, obviously, and he's not one that gets pushed into things very easily either. So, but I think, to be honest with you, he's right now in a good place. Obviously, he's had some good victories. His recent trip, the trip he's on in the UK, is going quite well. The deal with the European Union's gone well. The deal with Japan has gone well. These are the big economies that he wants to do deals with. Of course, Secretary Bessent right now with negotiators from China, in Switzerland. So these things are going on at a time when I suspect in the president's mind he's not thinking a lot about Canada, but I do think he likes where we're positioned, and I don't see any reason for him to change anything abruptly right now, but rather encourage ongoing discussions. I also get the sense that there are some discussions coming very, very soon, sort of face-to-face discussions between the players, to include perhaps Secretary Lutnick and others that are very close to the president.
You say you get that sense. I mean, do you know of something?
Well, No, listen. This is such a fluid situation that what I were to know right now may be different by tomorrow. In fact, so I don't know anything concrete. I'm just so you know, I'm sort of naturally optimistic, but I do get the sense in talking to folks close to the president and the president that he's in a good place and really should not be in a position, in my view anyway, to do anything that does any harm while so much good is going on.
You mentioned the deals with Japan and the EU. Those have 15% baseline tariffs. They seem like a bit of a boilerplate.
Yes.
Should Canada expect that on things that aren't enshrined under what we call CUSMA, what you call USMCA?
Yeah, so it's a great question, because I've wondered the same thing. I think the template is going to be fairly universal. I mean, the way it looks to me, it might even be 20%, but it seems to be a modest range that has sort of become the price of doing business with the world's largest economy. It doesn't seem unreasonable to me either, by the way, particularly since we really haven't seen a lot of inflation as a result of it. What we have seen is a lot of new revenue as a result of it. So I get the sense, and why wouldn't you, that the president feels like that's become a victory. With regard to Canada, though, and I would argue this, David, to the president and to his team, Canada is special. While I don't think Canada should be the 51st state, I don't think Canada wants to be the 51st state. In many respects, they're already our first cousin. And the fact that our supply chains, our value chains are so integrated is a strategic decision made by investors throughout the years and the decades. There are some things that need to be tweaked. I don't think there's any question. I think the situation with dairy is untenable. The sort of protectionism around soft lumber is sort of untenable. But by and large, we have a solid relationship. Steel and aluminum is the exception to that, and we'll just have to see how all of that plays out. But I could argue, and probably would, that no tariff on Canada, no sort of boilerplate tariff on Canada makes a lot of sense, but I'm just one person.
I want to ask you about selling tariffs themselves to your constituents. I mean, I know the president says that tariffs are paid by the other country, but you and I know that that's actually not how it works, that a tariff is a tax that is going to be paid by American consumers or American businesses. Sometimes there have been instances where the exporter has absorbed the cost, but for the most part, it's Americans who are paying this. How do you sell this to people in North Dakota?
Well, actually, North Dakota is a pretty populist state. It was a long time ago. It was when Theodore Roosevelt lived there. It was when we built our own state elevator and state mill, our state bank. So we tend to protect ourselves from the big guys from Minneapolis, if you will. So we already are naturally built that way. But I think at a 15% level, David, that North Dakotans, like a lot of other Americans, are starting to see that this isn't really having much of an inflationary effect. I mean, in fact, it's helping our economy. It's reducing, it's generating more revenue for the priorities of our government, which has value to the American taxpayer. I'm not so sure that most North Dakotans see the tariff as something that they're paying, until such time as, of course, it gets to be a 35 or a 50% tariff or more, at which point, obviously, an exporter or another country is not going to pay that. At the same time, we have a lot of other countries that put a lot of tariffs on our stuff, and we have never retaliated. So this is a bit of I think in the president's mind, and I agree, this is a little bit of a justice move in this case. And frankly, again, it's to this point gone quite well, where stock markets are liking it, investors are liking it, countries are moving, onshoring much more of the supply chain than they were previously, in some respects, to avoid that tariff. I don't think there's any question the president wants to bring more industry into the United States that we've acquiesced to other countries in previous years with different policies.
In short, you think it works?
I'm sorry. It works? I think so.
Yep. All right. Senator, thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks, David.
Now, on this side of the border, Prime Minister Mark Carney says he will only accept the best deal for Canada. But will that best possible deal still involve tariffs? Later this hour, the Power panel on the state of these negotiations as we approach President Trump's deadline. First, though, the UK says it will recognize Palestinian statehood unless Israel ends the war in Gaza. Coming up, former Canadian ambassadors to both Israel and the UN on that British ultimatum. Pressure is building on Israel to address the humanitarian crisis happening in Gaza, and the United Kingdom is using an ultimatum to push for change.
This is the moment to act. So today, as part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution.
The UK's announcement follows one from France yesterday when President Emmanuel Macron said his country would recognize Palestinian statehood also in September at the United Nations General Assembly. It comes just as a UN-affiliated report says a worst-case scenario of famine is unfolding in Gaza. We have two senior voices with us to discuss it all. Louise Blais is a former Canadian ambassador to the UN, and John Allen was Canada's ambassador to Israel, now a senior fellow at the Bill Graham Centre for Contemporary International History. Very glad to have you both on the program. And I throw the first question, Madame Blais, to you. What would recognizing Palestine as an independent state change?
Well, quite a few things. I mean, up until now, everyone's been hoping that Israel would participate in this process and that the state of Palestine would come into reality thanks to a negotiated settlement. As the chance of that are really decreasing, the world is saying, well, maybe we're going to have to proceed and have that step come first. What it could mean is it could actually mean right now Palestine is an observer to the General Assembly at the UN. It does not have a vote. It can participate in meetings, but not have a direct voice in a vote. And so it could, in fact, lead the Palestinian people to have a state recognition and a membership at the UN. They would need to be elected following even recognition of their statehood. But more and more people are starting to talk about states that don't necessarily have geographic boundaries. So we're into a whole new world now. In this case, obviously, they want the geographic location. But I think that the member states are running out of patience and want to put pressure on Israel.
John Allen, I want to talk about that ultimatum to Israel that's being issued here by the Brits, basically saying end the hostilities, let the food in, and if you don't do that, that we're going to go and recognize a Palestinian state. Is this an approach that is more likely to succeed than what has been tried before?
Well, frankly, David, I find the statement by the British Prime Minister bizarre and inappropriate. Recognition of Palestine is about the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination and the right of Palestine to become a state amongst nations. And it should not be used as a stick to try and coerce Israel into doing what, frankly, it's obligated to do, certainly in terms of ending the humanitarian crisis and ending in indiscriminate bombing, etc. On the one hand, it's good that the UK, one of the G7, along with France, has stepped up. But I would have hoped that the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, for example, would simply have stated that they are recognizing the state of Palestine, because, frankly, that's what should happen now.
Let me use your analogy of the stick. If the stick is intended to push for some kind of solution, some kind of end to hostilities, and to do so essentially within the next 5 or 6 weeks, is it likely to work? John, I'd throw it back to you, and then Louise Blais.
Absolutely not. Bibi Netanyahu said in the White House 10 days ago in front of the cameras that he has no interest in a two-state solution or a Palestinian state. He has the opportunity, frankly, to be integrated into the entire Arab world under the Saudi initiative, and that was mentioned in this declaration at the UN. And he won't agree to a pathway to a Palestinian state or negotiations of a state. So, frankly, the UK, I will bet, will be recognizing Palestine at the General Assembly.
So, Louise Blais, let me go to you because you know the United Nations well. You also know the international sense in which this all occurs. Keir Starmer and Mark Carney speaking today on the phone, just as the Brits have issued this ultimatum. Is there a pathway for Canada to do the same thing here?
Well, we certainly or seem to be going in that direction. We'll know only when it's announced. And certainly it wasn't in the speech of the minister Anand in front of the member states yesterday in New York. But I think slowly we have seen a shift in Canadian policy. And I come back to the reason for that. It is up until recently, it was really the cornerstone of our policy was that it had to be a settled agreement between Israel and Palestine that would create the state of Palestine. But now, on the one hand, we're saying exactly what John said, that the Israeli government does not seem at all interested in that. And second, we're seeing the suffering that is totally unacceptable, and the infringement of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. And so I think at this point, we'll have to wait and see. I think France is doing a lot of diplomacy. They said this conference was just a step in that direction. The president of France has said that this fall is when he plans to make France's position official. And I think there was a lot of corridor and a lot of meetings at the UN over the past 2 days behind the scenes to try to get a lot of European countries and Canada to follow suit.
We're talking, of course, in the context of the horrifying situation playing out in Gaza, the hunger, what has been called starvation, what is now on the cusp of perhaps being called famine, the very dangerous situation that's occurring there. But I also look at, in the context of Israel, they don't have a peace deal with the Saudis. They might have had one. France is saying, we're going to recognize the Palestinians regardless. The Brits saying, here's an ultimatum. We don't yet know what's going to happen with Canada. U.S. still seems to more or less have their back. Is Israel becoming more isolated? And if so, what will the context, what will the cost of that be? Louise Blais and then John Allen.
Well, I think it's been isolated for quite some time. I'll note that obviously they are boycotting this conference, and as are the Americans. There might have been a time where maybe a few more countries might have done so as well, maybe even Canada years ago, but not anymore. So I think but I'll go back a little bit to what John said. Despite this heat, and they've felt it for a long time, several months, if not years, but certainly since the conflict, it hasn't seemed to have changed the direction of their policies. So they are adamant that they are right, that until every single hostage is released and until Hamas is totally 100% dismantled, they will press on. So it's hard to see how they could be any more isolated than they already are.
John Allen, is there not just political risk, but a territorial risk of becoming ever more isolated?
Well, I'm very sad to say it, but I'd say at this point in time, given the humanitarian disaster, given the indiscriminate bombing, given the situation of Gazans on the ground, and given the abject refusal of the Prime Minister and many of his ministers to even acknowledge that it's happening, I'm sad to say that I think Israel's not just isolated, but it's becoming a pariah state. And that is very dangerous for Israel. I mean, I'm not worried about a country that has nuclear weapons and one of the largest militaries in the world and certainly in the region. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about the soul of Israel and its moral backbone. And what is going to happen in 2 or 3 years once the reality of what took place in Gaza becomes clear to everybody, when the rubble is taken away and bodies are found. Yes, Israel is isolated, and it's going to take time and a new government, a government committed to peace in the region, to begin to turn that around.
John Allen, Louise Blais, both former ambassadors, thank you so much for your time and for the context you're providing all of us here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Businesses across Canada are bracing for Friday. That is when the clock runs out on Canada-U.S. trade talks. Coming up, we have Ontario's Economic Development Minister, Vic Fedeli. He's in Washington, and he'll talk to us about how the province is preparing for a no-deal situation. This Friday is that August 1st deadline for negotiations between Canada and the U.S., and Canadian industries are waiting to learn what might change for them, deal or no deal. President Trump has announced deals recently with Japan and Europe. Both of them involved a baseline tariff, plus promises from the other nation to invest hundreds of billions of dollars and spend a lot in the United States. The American ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, spoke about chances for a Canadian deal today when he was in Winnipeg.
We now have agreements with Japan. We have an agreement with the UK, with the EU, and some other countries. Hopefully very soon we will be able to outline an agreement that is good for the United States and is also good for Canada to reframe exactly what that relationship is going to look like with Canada. It will change, but I am very optimistic.
Ontario's Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, Vic Fedeli, joining us now, and he's in Washington. Minister Fedeli, good day to you.
Good day to you as well, David.
I know you are in Washington. You've met a lot of people today. Do you have any information that would suggest we are closer today to a deal between Canada and the U.S. than we were, say, last week?
Well, I think everybody is eager, in some cases anxious, for August 1st. But at the end of the day, you really need a deal that can work for all of Canada. And so we hope, of course, that that a deal is there to be made. But ultimately, you know, it has to be up to President Trump if he's wakes up and says we're doing a deal today or not. That's really what it's going to come down to. I think the team here in Washington and all across Canada has been working very, very hard, and we'll have to see where the president stands on the 1st of August.
And he has previously said, and his Commerce Secretary has reiterated just in the last 24 hours, Friday's the day. It's got to happen by that day. But we've also heard, earlier on this program from a Republican senator, Senator Cramer, who said his hope is that, okay, perhaps they've been busy. They just haven't got to the point of getting a deal, but one is in sight. And so do nothing for now. No new tariffs, nothing like that, and just push the deadline. Do you see that as a likely scenario?
Well, you know, anything is possible when it comes to President Trump, but I would say whatever happens here in Ontario, we're ready for all eventualities. And I think that's the important thing, that we just need to be prepared and to be able to have the supports in place for our businesses and our families. Should something happen on August 1st that we're not looking forward to.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. If we have a no-deal scenario and we have the threatened 35% tariff on goods that aren't CUSMA compliant, Ontario is the most trade-exposed province. What happens at that point?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, we're very pleased last March when Premier Ford was here and was able to along with the Canadian government, make USMCA, this is the NAFTA 2.0 deal, the deal that stands. And so about 92 to 95% of all the trade between Ontario and the US is NAFTA compliant, NAFTA 2.0 compliant, so basically tariff free. But there are still sectors like steel, lumber that are affected, and so we have to make sure that we have the firepower ready, which we do in Ontario, to help those sectors and to help them pivot as well. That's a really important piece, is getting them prepared to pivot. There are things that we could be making here in Ontario, more rebar, more I-beams, things like that we can use the steel for, making wider steel and thicker steel for the defense sector in Germany and the rest of the EU that need all that steel for shipbuilding and for tanks. You know, they're freeing up $2 trillion in the EU just for rearmament. And so Ontario, they can't do it alone. They don't have enough horsepower to be able to put that kind of production out. They need Ontario and they need our steel. So we'll look to help them diversify around the world.
Minister, I do want to also ask you, in that no deal scenario, your boss, Premier Ford, has said he wants dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff response. What evidence do we have that the retaliatory tariffs that we've put into place right now have worked? And I ask that because we don't yet have a deal.
Well, again, we'll look on August 1st, and the Premier has been very clear. We've been at the front end of our own retaliatory measures. We don't buy American liquor for our liquor stores. That's $1 billion a year in lost sales to the States. Province of Ontario buys $30 billion a year of goods and services. There's no American firm that can bid on that. We're in the middle of $200 billion of infrastructure, roads and bridges, subways. No American firm can bid on that. So I think our hand is very, very clear on how we feel that we need to handle this. Look, this is unjustified, unwarranted tariffs. They're illegal tariffs. That's our position. And we need to be able to fight back where the opportunities that came in front of Ontario are there. And we've been taking advantage of those opportunities.
Is the Premier still open to the idea of shutting off electricity exports from Ontario to their southern neighbors?
I think the Premier's been really clear that all options are on the table. We've really shown the strength of what we mean by that by eliminating U.S. opportunities on $231 billion that I mentioned worth of goods and services. And we stand firmly with the Premier on his statement that all options are on the table.
How do you, in the discussions that you're having with American lawmakers and American business and American groups, maintain your composure when you've got something that you have long said and others have said, these are illegal tariffs, but the White House doesn't care. We matter, they need our stuff, but the White House doesn't seem to care. How do you continue to have a discussion with people when they're the big guy, we're the little guy, and they seem to be able to do, to some extent, whatever they want?
Well, we try to bring some calm discussions into it. And I can tell you the sentence that I repeated probably at 6 meetings today was, look, it's hurtful for your president to say, we don't need anything from Canada. We don't want your cars. We don't need your steel. And I said at every meeting, look, you buy 80% of all the nickel you use in your aerospace sector comes from Ontario. 53% of all the nickel you buy for your defense sector comes from Ontario. These are two very, very important sectors, and people nod their head and they think, yeah, you do have a point there. And then we talk about things like potash. 95% of their potash for their farms comes from Canada. 60% of the aluminum they use in everything from beer cans to car engines comes from Canada. So when we just present the facts outside of the White House, people begin to understand. And that's why we've been back and forth here in Washington so many times, just meeting with as many groups as we can, senators, members of Congress, business leaders, industry leaders, and just give them the facts. We are the #1 customer for 17 states, the #2 customer for 11 more. 9 million Americans wake up every single morning to make products to ship to us. Mm-hmm. And, we get a lot of nods. They begin to understand the important links and the linked business relationship that we've had, Ontario has had with the United States for more than a century.
Well, Minister Fedeli, I know you've had lots of meetings there in Washington today, and they've come on the heels of many more meetings by many other politicians, including Dominic LeBlanc, who's there in Washington at the same time as you, trying to cut this deal. Good luck. Thank you very much for your time. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, David. We wish the feds a lot of success for Friday.
Absolutely. That is Ontario's Minister of Economic Development, Vic Fedeli. All right, a U.S. Republican senator has told us that he is hopeful President Donald Trump will extend that Friday deadline with Canada. So, how long could we be trapped in what is still uncertainty? Power panel next with what's at stake for Canadian officials this week as they remain deep in talks there in Washington, D.C. Time's running out for Canada to secure a trade deal with the Americans before the president's deadline this Friday. And if no deal is reached, Donald Trump has said he'll impose a 35% tariff on all Canadian goods that are not compliant with our free trade agreement. And on top of existing tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos, of course. We spoke earlier to Republican Senator Kevin Cramer. He says he's hopeful Trump will extend Friday's deadline.
I think in all likelihood, David, that Friday's deadline may come and go. My hope is, and what I'm encouraging the president to do, is to not issue any new tariffs, any 35% or anything like that, but rather extend the deadline if a deal isn't made. I think it's hard to put all of the onus on the other countries when we're deal making with so many at the same time. And I think he has that sense of fair play as well.
Fodder for the Power Panel. We are joined now by Emily Nicolas, who's a columnist for Le Devoir, Michelle Caderio, who was Deputy Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin, and here with me in studio, Kate Harrison, a conservative political analyst. Good day to you all.
Good to be here.
Good day. Hi.
All right, Kate, I'll start with you. You're here right beside me. We have sort of conflicting signals. We've had the president say August 1st is the day. Howard Lutnick has come up recently and said it's the day. You hear Kevin Cramer, the U.S. Senator, saying, well, hopefully they would push it because Canada, fair play. Yeah. Should we expect fair play given everything that's happened from the Americans?
Yeah, deadlines have been evolving and moving really since, these conversations began after the election. I think at this point, 48 hours away or 72 hours away, probably unlikely to have a comprehensive trade agreement between Canada and the U.S. And that is understandable to some degree because the nature of our trade relationship is obviously much more complex than a number of the other countries that have struck agreements. But there is political risk here for the Prime Minister. He was elected to get a deal done for Canada. It was a core issue, perhaps the sole focus of his election bid. And so the more we have these deadlines that keep slipping, the more we see other countries strike agreements or agreements in principle. We had news today, obviously, that China had a stay, at least, in raising their tariffs after August 1st. So the more progress there is with other countries, David, the more risk there is, I think, to the Prime Minister in being able to authentically and credibly communicate that he's got a handle on the situation here in Canada and that he has been successful in making this a priority for the President, who has been pretty clear this week that Canada is not on the priority list.
Yeah, and Michelle, let's talk about that because the Prime Minister's office and officials around him have been signaling for more than a week now that perhaps there will not be a deal done, that they're looking for the best deal possible. Does that early signaling insulate the Prime Minister politically should this deadline not be met?
I don't think that Canadians are going to hold him to a deadline to make a bad deal. He campaigned during the election and talked about getting the best deal for Canadians and that he's not going to sign a bad deal. I don't know that, what the EU got from the president is less than and not as good as what we actually have today with the current levels of tariffs in place. They still have the steel tariffs. They still have the aluminum tariffs at 50%, just like we do. So, each country and party to these deals is different. I don't think we're going to know until the morning of the 1st or maybe late in the day on the 1st whether that is the deadline and Mr. Trump's going to do something else or not. And even if he says something on August 1st, there's nothing to say he's not going to say something different on August 2nd. So, I think that, and I think Canadians understand that. I really do. He is chaotic. He is completely unpredictable. And, bless that senator who was suggesting that he's going to be a person of fair play and he understands that, different countries and all that. I don't know where I don't know what he's thinking. I don't know what he's seen. I don't know if he's actually witnessed the last 7 months or 6 months of Donald Trump, but that's certainly not the experience I think anyone in the world would describe to him.
Yeah, and I'm not sure the degree to which the president listens to him or perhaps to anybody. Let's talk about some of the nitty-gritty here because they are in negotiations. They are in talks. We know Dominic LeBlanc is in Washington. What if the outcome of this is more chipping away at supply management? What would be the cost of that, Emily, in Quebec and beyond?
Supply management would be a really hard one to swallow in terms of domestic politics. There is a list of demands that premiers have put forward and Quebec has put forward in terms of anything that has to do with language and culture as far as Quebec is concerned, as well as supply management. I think those are the three things that are supposed to be off the table. That being said, I think we do have a little bit more of a clear picture of what could be happening when you look at the deal that was struck with the EU recently, in a sense that it's not great when you look at the economics of it, but at the same time, Europe is signing this in part because they're hoping to get Donald Trump away from Vladimir Putin and secure some sort of peace in Europe, and especially with the war in Ukraine. And so what we are seeing in that example is that the way that commercial agreements are negotiated might have something to do with things that are not commercial. So even if Mark Carney gets to sign an amazing thing for the Canadian economy, the first thing I want to ask is at what cost to what other thing besides our economy? And so I think this is the world that we're living in, and we need to understand, even once again, going to the Europe example, that even if an agreement is signed, there is no way to know with a president as volatile as Donald Trump that this agreement will not be violated in the near future. And so it's some guarantee of stability, but not that much as long as President Trump is in power. If people are looking for an agreement to be struck as a way to reassure investors and calm the volatility of geopolitics, I think as long as Donald Trump is president, there will be volatility in both the economy and geopolitics.
Yeah, I take, Emily, your point, and I turn to Kate here because, yes, volatility, is it as good as the paper it's written on? I mean, frankly, we don't even know if there are papers that have been written on for the European deal. It doesn't seem like anybody's seen that. It's been all word of mouth about what's been communicated. The Japanese deal is very, very thin. The details to be worked out later. What happens for Canada, given that we have to renegotiate this thing by law anyway a year from now?
Yeah, well, it's clear Canada's strategy here is to try and keep their powder dry on as much as possible until that broader renegotiation, because any give now could give way to some bigger concessions as a part of the formal CUSMA renegotiation that happens in 2026. So you can understand the strategy behind wanting to concede as little as possible for the current government. But that is coming up against the political reality and the economic reality of continued tariffs, particularly for really key industrial sectors in Ontario and in Quebec, with auto and steel respectively. And again, the Prime Minister being the one to raise the stakes about the focus and the importance of achieving a new economic and security pact with the United States. This was a one-issue election for the Prime Minister. Many Canadians held their nose and voted Liberal because they thought that Mark Carney would be the guy to get a deal done. So I think there is a lot of goodwill being extended to the Prime Minister because we are dealing with, a volatile actor in the White House. But at some point, that's going to come up against the reality of the tariff environment, continued inflationary spending, and again, missing that bigger picture on affordability challenges that are facing people, because we're talking about tariffs. We're not talking about the cost of groceries right now. We're not talking about the housing crisis. These are still problems that Canadians are grappling with. So because Mark Carney has raised expectations on this issue, he is going to be the one that probably falls to some of those expectations that he has set.
Michelle, let's say we do get a deal and the deal looks like Japan and the European Union, it's 15% and it's on the non-CUSMA compliant goods. Let's say it looks like that. How do you sell that to Canadians, that Canadian goods have a tariff, but American goods coming in here don't?
Well, it's very delicate. And the other thing I would just say to Kate is that every single one of those so-called handshake deals all contain 50% tariffs with aluminum and steel. There's no country that's gotten a break on that. So, I think that, they very much have in mind those very key industries to Canada. And the other thing I would say is that, he talked about getting a deal, but more than that, Prime Minister Carney is focused on getting the Canadian economy restructured so that we are not so freaking dependent on the United States, right? We need our economic independence, and that means that we need to have other customers. We need to be counting on ourselves, on our own industries when we're building things and when we're, doing this big defense spending, which is going to be unprecedented. There is a lot of opportunity for Canadian business, for Canadian manufacturing. and for Canadian commodities. And so now it's about structuring the economy so that they can take advantage of those. And I think that that is equally as important to him as getting a deal with our biggest customer and our biggest market. So, you know, he is very focused on the duality of that purpose. But you know, putting all the stock into Donald Trump, who would take that bet? Like, it's just not worth it. It's way too risky.
Emily, let me turn to you with the no deal scenario. Doug Ford has come out and said he wants dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff response. We've heard other premiers more recently shy away from that idea. What evidence do we have? I keep asking this. What evidence do we have that the approach we have taken with retaliatory tariffs has got the result that we have sought?
There is a very there's a logic bug essentially in the question, in the sense that we cannot know what would have happened in the other scenario.
Very true.
It's fictional politics, and so I cannot answer that. What I can say is that when it comes to going back to Kate's comment, I feel like we're going through some things that we've been through during the pandemic as well, in the sense that in the first couple of months, everybody was, it wasn't called elbows up back then, but there was still this kind of rallying around there as a crisis, let's all be together. And then when it comes to figuring out the details of how it's done and assuming the cost of that collective efforts, then you start to see the cracks politically. And so I think there's a likelihood that we're about to go through a similar cycle where, for example, provincial differences are going to show, and it's going to be up to Mark Carney, not only with negotiation with the United States, but really on this project of rebuilding the Canadian economy differently, to have enough to offer there to be able to calm down those division on how to deal with Donald Trump. For example, this everything that has to do with big infrastructure project. There is so many other things that the Canadian government has been launching as ideas that we haven't that hasn't actually landed yet, and so those I think are going to maybe draw the attention away from only just a negotiation with Donald Trump, although those definitely will hurt whatever happens, whether there's a deal or if there's no deal. I don't think that the deal will be as good as what we had before or just last year. And so we're about to go through hard times, and sometimes hard times makes people's temper go up. And then I think we're about to see that, a little bit of that in the Council of Federation. I think we had a really good meeting the last time around, but political experience shows that this never lasts forever, and so I'm looking forward to see what's going to be the next debate, and what's going to be Mark Carney's way to respond to that.
All right, let's use our last couple of minutes to discuss the social lives of former prime ministers. TMZ is reporting that Justin Trudeau and pop star Katy Perry were spotted not just once but twice in Montreal yesterday. They appear to have walked Perry's dog before changing for a dinner at Le Violin restaurant in the city's Plateau neighborhood. Perry, currently on tour in Canada, performing right here in Ottawa tonight, then tomorrow in Montreal. Kate?
We're going there.
We're going there. It is not usual that Power and Politics quotes TMZ. Right. This might be the first time ever, but people are talking about it.
People are talking about it. A prime minister named Trudeau having a flair for someone with celebrity status. Geez.
You're shocked.
I'm shocked.
Yeah.
You know, apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We started the segment talking about dates that matter. August 1st is a date that I think matters probably more than what the prime minister is doing with his social life. And we can let two people that peaked in 2015 carry on with their private lives.
Emily, just tell us, what do you know of this restaurant? I tried to look it up online, and they don't have a menu online, just it's seafood facing. Do you know it?
It's posh, and it's not of public interest. I think this whole story, I understand why people are talking about it, but it's not a political story. Here's what would make it a political story. If they're trying to go to space again with Jeff Bezos or whoever else money and some billionaire involved, that would be a political story. But as long as people are going to dinner, it's not a political story, although it's very entertaining.
Michelle, we've run out of time. I know that's terrible news for you.
You know, you want to hear me roar? I don't know. Listen, private man, private life, and good on him. I hope he's happy.
There you have it. All right. Thank you to the three of you. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That is Emily Nicolas, Michelle Cadario, and Kate Harrison. And with that, I'm David Common. Thank you very much for watching Power in Politics. Much more ahead right here on CBC News Network. And of course, we'll be back here tomorrow with the latest details as those trade negotiations continue in Washington. Stick around, and thanks for watching.